What's up, guys? Cameron Foos here with FoosAlerts.com. It is October 23rd. Just want to do some video lessons on a couple of the big plays today. First up was STXS. This was called out perfectly in chat and on live TV or live Foos TV. Unfortunately, I did not get into this trade when I needed to. I called it out perfectly. I put my order in at 375, and I just barely missed it by about a penny. Before this thing ripped all the way up to near $6 per share. But let's just go over the pattern that formed up this morning, and kind of the identifiers of what the buy triggers were for STXS and why I was excited about this stock in the first place this morning, and which gave way to it rallying over 40% today. First, just looking at the daily chart, we have a stock that all of a sudden started breaking out here on volume. That was creeping back up over the 13 EMA, and we bounced off the 13 EMA yesterday after the lows, and we had a slight gap open this morning. Yesterday close was at 357. Today's open was at 363. So it's a small gap, but momentum was firing off right out of the gates here this morning. There was also looked like there was news out here this morning, third quarter preliminary results. Here on STXS, so that there was multiple catalysts between news, bouncing up the 13 EMA, and then looking at the intraday chart. Obviously, there is the F1 pattern, which is a very, very bullish pattern that is basically my favorite pattern to play. The F1 is in the time frame of the only time that I record and broadcast live on Foos TV, because the F1s are my favorite chart patterns to play to get into right out of the gates in the morning. Because the rest of the day for me, is way less predictable. Trading the F1s are typically when stocks are first making their big move, or triggering that first move that's going to lead to the rest of the rally throughout the session. So looking at STXX here right out of the gates this morning, we had that nice little spike here this morning on volume after that tiny little gap, and I called it out right about here at 372, saying, hey, check out STXS. We're breaking out of an F1 at 372. At that point, I started putting in my order. I put it in at 375 for 5,000 shares. Trying to get in, as I missed that opportunity because it spiked very quickly. This is within the first 3 minutes of the open. Each one of these candles is a minute chart. So within the first 3 minutes, we already had this tiny little F1 formed. So a very short-term signal. This was very difficult to be there. There's a lot of other stocks I'm watching at the same exact time. And so I first saw this breakout at 372, hit that trigger right there, and it had a nice, big spike up over 10 cents in just, seconds there that this broke out. Came back down from at this point. I put in my order at 375 for 5,000 shares, and we only ticked to a low of 375 on the bid here. And I just barely missed my entry. From there, continued up. I still had my order in, and then we broke out of a secondary F1 breakout pattern here at 385. I did not fill in this order. I was still hoping to get my 375 order as we neared right up to this breakout point. I just wanted to see it dip just by a few pennies, so I just barely missed getting my entry here, and I just did not chase it. From that point on, it spiked, from 385 all the way up to 483. That's a huge spike there. That's the stock moved very, very quickly. If you weren't there at the exact right time, this thing would leave without you. And at that point, the stock is up massively, up 40 cents. I'm not one to try to chase into a 40-cent spike. So at that point, I just brushed it off as crap. I totally missed that perfect F1 breakout. I'm not going to chase it here. I had it, just barely missed it by a penny. I had the order at 375. The low here was 375. Unfortunately, the bid did not get filled there. And from this point, after that F1, this continued to grind it up here, pretty much rallying along the 13 EMA on the 1 minute chart for the whole day. It broke down a few times on the 1 minute chart. Probably on the 2 minute chart it followed a little bit better. Here, looking at the 2 minute chart, this basically rode the 2 minute intraday 13 EMA for the whole entire session, all the way up until about 537 or 540s before it kind of started consolidating back and forth. But it did not stop there. It continued all the way up to a high of 570 here and closed at about 506 here. But That was a huge move here today that just continued to grind along the 13 EMA trend on the 2-minute chart, and it all started here right out of the gates just by identifying that quick little F1 breakout pattern that I teach you in FUS 4 Part 2, which is, a huge, you got to understand that pattern, because that's typically where most patterns begin. They always start out with a F1 breakout pattern within, minutes of the open. Typically, I like to trade it within the first 2 hours, which is the first F1 stage. After that, it's F2 and F3. F2s I don't really like to trade. F3s are the closing breakouts that I like to trade on those stocks. So taking a look at an F3 here, let's take a look at CPRX. This is one that we were talking about yesterday. Another member, Trickster, was always, asking me, he's like, but what about the daily chart? The daily chart doesn't look that great. The daily chart doesn't mean anything. It means a lot, but, if there are F patterns that are forming up intraday, regardless of what the daily chart looks like, those F patterns can make those moves and still react based on the F pattern breakout formations, regardless of what the daily chart is looking like over here. So looking at CPRX into the close yesterday, this actually had a gap open yesterday that broke out an F1 that had a quick little spike. Let's zoom in on the chart here. This was another F1 that broke out here on CPRX, but a lot of times, these F1 patterns might only get just a quick little spike, and as soon as it breaks down the 13 EMA on the 1-minute chart, that's the first sign of a potential reversal and possibly failure. So a lot of these times on these F1s, it could just mean a quick little scalp, make a couple $100 on, depending on how many shares you have. As you can see, CPRX got the gap open, started forming this flag here, continued to ride the 13 EMA. Once that broke out at 175, made a quick little spike up to about 182, 183. So that's definitely, scalpable, just trading that little pattern. But as soon as that broke down the 13 EMA on the 1-minute chart, came all the way back down to that trigger in the low 70s. But, that doesn't mean that the stock's done for the day. It could just mean, a short-term reversal there before the stock rallies back up or forms up another pattern intraday. As you can see, this thing just continued to rally here, and into the close, this actually formed up an F3 breakout pattern. F3 breakout pattern is basically just a triangle formation that's formed throughout the entire session and is looking like it's going to break out, or it does break out into the last hour or two of this session, and that's what CPRX did here. And an F3 breakout typically means momentum going forward into the following session or a gap open, and that's exactly what happened here on CPRX going into the following day. So here's kind of the closing prices on CPRX. It broke out over these highs of this triangle pattern. This is a 1-minute chart. You can use any kind of time frame you look at. I typically look at 1-minute charts because this is kind of what I prefer. But as soon as this opened the next morning, this gapped all the way up to $2 per share from about 183 all the way up to $2 per share. From there, this continued to form up another F1 breakout pattern that I actually scalped here from about 198, sold a little at 103 or 203, and then sold again at 2, locking in just a quick little short-term gain. Looked like it was breaking down the 13 EMA here on the 1-minute chart. But it bounced back off that level. I didn't know what it was going to do. It could have easily just reversed here, but it actually had a little bit more spike in there before it came back down into the 190s, which would have put me on a losing position. So, stocks are very volatile. They don't always just continue to explode like STXS did today. A lot of the times these F1 or intraday patterns, all they give you is just a quick little spike to try to sell into and potentially scalp at CPRX. Kind of traded flat all day and didn't do much after that breakout there. But STXS, for example, this thing hit that F1 and those two F1 triggers, and this completely ripped to the upside. You never know which stocks are going to do this. You really don't know. Even if I would have bought into and got my fill on 375 for STXS, I could have easily just sold at $4 per share because that's the next whole number resistance level, and I might have just called it, good. Oh, that was a nice rip, 375 to $4 per share. Took 25 cents, awesome trade, without even having a clue that this thing would have ripped 40% the rest of the day. You don't know what these stocks are going to do. The best thing you can do is try to ride the trend. Looking at the 2-minute chart, this thing rode the 2-minute intraday 13 EMA pretty much all up to 540. So as long as the stock holds the 13 EMA on whatever time frame you're looking at, there's really no telling how high it can go. That's kind of the cardinal rule that I teach in Foos 4, even on a daily chart breakout. When a stock breaks out of a Foos 4 pattern on the daily chart, as long as it holds the 13 EMA, there's no telling how high it can go. The trend is still very, very strong. And, if I could stick to that strategy and actually, have some balls to hold for a while, I could, have some gigantic wins of, 100 to 500% gainers. But I just don't have that kind of patience in me. Especially with how active today's market is. I like to take my profits when I have them, and I miss out on a lot of big trades because I don't have that kind of patience. But always remember that cardinal rule to follow the 13 EMA on whatever time frame you're looking at to look at that trend. Another one that we're looking at here is VICL VICL. This was another perfect F1 breakout pattern that I bought into this morning. This was kind of a combination of a revival pattern. This is a good example of implementing both Foos 4 plus Foos 4 Part 2, both lessons that I teach in both those two separate DVDs. Foos 4 is the daily chart we're looking at here. This is a Foos 4 revival. Lead-in trend is bearish, and we had that nice triangle formation, but that ended up breaking out. But what triggered me to buy into this early was this actual F1 breakout pattern here on the intraday 1-minute chart. We had that nice little spike out of the gates here in the morning, had this flag form up here with this kind of resistance level at 140. As soon as this broke out of this 140 level, that triggered the spike there, BIOL. This is one that actually got stopped out for a loss this morning. As you can see, this dropped over down to 202 this morning, but it did bounce right up to 13 EMA. It's just a very low float, low volume stock that's very volatile, and it's very easy to get your ass handed to you on a low volume sell off from this stock. But I got back in here on the red to green move here at 212, sold up in the 220, sold again at 218. Locked in some gains. This definitely still has upside potential. This is the same thing. This is a revival pattern on day one. Nice volume increase, but it's just a very a volatile, low float stock. It's easy to get stopped out on because especially when I have 10,000 or 12,000 shares on this, every penny or so is $100 to $120 profit or loss, depending on how hard this moves. So a low volume sell off, if it sells off 10 cents, all of a sudden that's me losing $1,000. So it's easy to stop out of a trade like this that can move on low volume. But overall, right now, BIOL looking strong into the close here. Could definitely see a continuation going forward. But right now, I locked in the profits on this and moving on. But anyways, that's it for today's video lessons. Hope you guys learned something new, and either that or just reiterated some stuff that you needed to learn again, just to try to help you make some money in the long run. But anyways, that's it for today. Hopefully we have some more trades coming in this week, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.